Good morning. I am your host, Cindy Welch from the Southwest Florida Library Network. Over there in the top right is our American Sign Language interpreter, Debbie Hause. Thank you for joining us for Toto, We're Not in the Library Anymore, Working Effectively Beyond Your Building. Our presenter today is Laura Solomon. Laura Solomon is a Library Services Manager for the Ohio Public Library Information Network and a W3C certified front-end web developer. She has been doing web development and design for more than 20 years in both public libraries and as an independent consultant. She specializes in developing with Drupal, never really sure of that pronunciation. She is a 2010 Library Journal mover and shaker. She's written 3 books about social media and content marketing specifically for libraries, and she speaks nationally on both these and technology-related topics. As a former children's librarian, she enjoys bringing the fun of technology to audiences and in giving libraries the tools they need to better service their virtual customer. Welcome, Laura. Thank you for being here. Over to you.
Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. And it is pronounced Drupal, just for your future reference. Hi, folks. Anyway, I am coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio today, where it's actually sunny, which is a very rare occurrence. I'm always very jealous when I talk to you folks in Florida because you get to enjoy a lot more sunshine than we do up here on what we call the North Coast. I have a lot to cover today, but before I get started, I wanted to let you know that I'm actually really fond. Oh, someone's from Cleveland Heights. I used to work for the Cleveland Heights University Heights Public Library, actually. Long ago. But if I am, I'm stuttering, sorry. I actually am really fond of engaging directly with folks in the chat, and I'm generally pretty good at interrupting myself and putting myself back on track. So if you have any comments about anything that we're talking about today, or any of your own experiences that you'd like to share, or questions, you don't have to hold off to the end, please feel free to put those in the chat, and if I'll try to catch up with them when I can. Okay, so here's a picture of what I look like when I'm not working from home. But I have been working out of my house about 99% of the time for more than 12 years. My physical office is about 3 hours away, or 150 miles from where I live, so I'm probably only physically present to my coworkers about 10 to 12 days a year. Now, Cindy mentioned in my bio that I work for an organization called SWFLN. Oh, and by the way, I don't have one of these. This is a telepresence robot. This is actually a cheap model. We've joked in the office for a long time about getting me one of these, but honestly, I have found we don't really need it. We're actually very good at working remotely. So you may have seen these, and I know that these were once featured on an episode of The Big Bang Theory, for those of you who are Big Bang Theory fans. Oh, thank you, Natalia. She likes my headshot. Anyway, I work for this organization called the Ohio Public Library Information Network, or the acronym is SWFLN. And just a little background, we are essentially the ISP for public libraries in Ohio. We're a very unique agency. We are a state agency that works specifically for public libraries, and we provide the broadband for public libraries in Ohio. That's our main job. It's not the only job that we do, but everything we do is tech related. And we have been working remotely, all of us, at some point for a long time. Now, I'm the only one who's been working out of my house pretty much almost all of the time, but most of our staff works out of their home at least 1 or 2 times a week for the most part. It's only now during the course of this pandemic that we now have folks working at home all of the time, just like I always have. So when people ask me how I'm doing during these uncertain times, it's a little strange, to be honest, because for me, not much, a whole lot has changed, but everything around me has. So I totally get it. And so I've heard a lot of stories of distress about working at home for the first time, and we're going to talk about some of that today. Just to share a fun thing with you, we have a webcam in our office. We always have, because inside our office,
Hi guys, it looks like Laura has lost the mic. We're going to give her a few minutes to get back in. Hopefully you all can hear me. Please let me know if you can or can't. Good. Okay, good deal. Okay, let's see what we can do to get our presenter back in. Here we go. Laura, we should be able to get you back now.
can you hear me? This is Laura.
Yes, ma'am. Yay!
Okay, was it just me who disappeared, or did everybody disappear?
I think it was just you.
Oh, geez. All right. I guess internet connectivity where I live is not doing so great today. That's the first time I've ever had that happen. Anyway, we have a webcam in our office, and I mentioned hopefully before I disappeared that normally the webcam sits inside so that we can all see the front door when the mail carrier comes in, but now that we're not in the physical office anymore, we moved the webcam out to the hallway, and my director put his Nancy Pearl action figure out in the mail tray so we can see when mail is coming still. So, you know, I've been working at home for so long, I don't think of it as a big deal, but for many, it really is. And a foreign work environment is just the beginning of much of what has to be considered. So if you want to feel better about how your own WFH or work from home experience is going, or you want to contribute your own experiences, please feel free. Sam has a Nancy Pearl action figure too, I see in the chat. So there's a fun hashtag on Twitter right now called WFH Fail, and I wanted to share just a few of my favorites that I've seen recently that I thought might make you feel a little better if you're having a rough work from home experience. Here's someone who says, thanks to our cat and one of our dogs, I was literally bruised and bloodied this morning during the course of a conference call. On an unrelated note, when can we go back to the office? I can at least say I've never had that happen. Here's another that says, Day 1 of WFH, this is not looking good. May need to consider chaining the fridge shut and making sure the other household members take the key. Just a thought. Plus side, I learned wine makes me productive. That's not a lesson I've ever learned, but for some maybe it works. Here's someone who didn't check the environment before they started to have a video meeting. So that's a fun one right there, where you can see the antlers behind this gentleman's head and he's centered just right. And last one, when I'm bored at the office, I usually walk around, have a chat with a few people, ask how things are going on, check if anything needs to be done. And I tried that at home today. Things didn't end well, folks. So there are lots of funny things with this hashtag. There's also some realistic issues that you'll see if you just take a peek in this on Twitter. Before I put this webinar together, I did a little survey in Ohio of public library folks, and I asked 4 simple questions. I'm about to file an HR complaint against my boyfriend, Cheryl says. So there were 4 simple questions, and so I'm going to do an informal survey of you as well, so that we can kind of compare results to Florida, between Florida and Ohio. And the first question I want to ask you, is this your first time working from home during this pandemic meeting? So a couple no's, a lot of yeses, which seems to be pretty typical and not surprising. And I can't do a count, obviously, but I'm getting the feeling for most or a lot of you. And my dogs are ecstatic, Sam says. Okay, so here's how it shook out in Ohio. And you can see here, our rate of working from home might be a tad higher than your area. But for the most part, most people are working from home for the first time. So the second question I want to ask you, do you prefer working from home to working in a library building? Do you prefer working from home? I see a lot of no's. Oh, I see some big capital no's with lots of exclamation points. Some of the time, not at all. I like a couple of days, but not every day. No, though, it's nice to get to work with my puppy. Good and not so good points, says Eva. All right, well, here's how it worked out in Ohio. And your responses are pretty much right in line. The commute is 30 seconds, and that's a plus. Yes, it is. So you can see here that only about 10% of Ohio said, yeah, we prefer working from home. The majority definitely want to go back to their buildings, and some, like some of you, aren't sure or have mixed feelings or like some things about both. The third question I asked, and I'm going to ask it a little differently, so just for the sake of time, is what are the worst, the most problematic issues for you when working from home? What are your biggest issues when working from home? And I gave the folks in Ohio a set list, so we'll be interested to see how your list. Distractions, I see quite a few distractions. Being consistent, purpose, no students, having supplies, finding work, slow connectivity, having a toddler, children, structure, no structure, frequent breaks, interruptions and supplies, connecting to the network, sitting too much, not getting enough exercise, trying to balance work and home life. That's a big one, I tell you. Tech issues. Keep putting those in. I'm going to give you just a quick look at what we did with this question in Ohio. Eating, Carrie says. Carrie actually, that was actually number one in Ohio. There's no lock on the fridge or the pantry is what that purple bar is at the bottom. And it narrowly edged out, not sure what to do to keep busy. So let me give you the numbers on this, just so you can have the specifics. You can see how this all broke down. Respondents could choose more than one, so that's why you're going to see the percentages do not add up to 100%. Too much screen time, no sleep. I miss having an audience. Dogs demanding treats. That comes under kids and pets, I think. All right, so the last question then, as I ask the inverse of what we just saw, what are the best parts of working from home for you? What have you liked the most? I saw at least one or two comments about commute earlier. Commute productivity. Yeah, definitely the commute wins, I think, with almost everyone. Being with my dog, not having to dress up, getting a lot done, make my own schedule, flexibility, lots of time for trainings. And you can see how you're kind of shaking out there, sweatpants all day long. So you can see here in Ohio, folks really appreciated being home with pets and kids. I did not ask them to differentiate. I put them both into one category for simply the ease of answering. So it might be at this point now, since the survey was at least a couple weeks ago, maybe they're sick of their kids. I'm not sure, because now they're home here in Ohio until the end of the school year. So maybe the response on that might change. But that was just a survey I did, and I did that because I want folks to understand that these are common problems that everyone has or has at least some of, and also we're not alone. So if you're feeling, you probably are feeling, frankly, at least a little isolated, especially if this is your first time working from home, but you should at least know that everyone is struggling with these same issues. Oh, and there's the numbers, by the way. Again, they could choose more than one, so the percentages don't add up to 100%. So I'll give you just a second to catch that there. And now, let's get on to the meat of this. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about. So where you're working, we're going to talk about the work environment itself. We're going to talk about video meetings, how you can make them better, not just for you, but for other people who are in the meeting with you. We're going to talk just a little bit about customer service and internal communications, because the vast majority, and I'm going to guess probably even all of you at some point, have done customer service by email, over the phone. That's not new. I would hope, at any rate. But there are some specific things for when everybody involved is remote that I want to talk about. So we're just going to spend a little time on that. And lastly, because I do work for a tech agency, and this is really important, especially now, we're going to talk about some cybersecurity and tech things that you should be aware of and be looking at and taking care of, hopefully, while you're working from home. Oh, there's the, yes, it says agenda. Okay. So let's talk about when you're working from home, sweet home, or maybe it's not so sweet, right? As some of you have already alluded to. So a lot of these things might seem like they are common sense, but my own experiences and the stories I've heard so far in this pandemic make me think that a lot of people, they didn't have the time to think about what they were going to need or do once they were working from home all the time. So, this was all thrust up upon just about everyone, right? So you didn't have time to plan for it. So as a result, everyone tends to learn as they go. And some lessons, of course, are harder than others. It's really critical, first off, to have a separate place to work from. When I say a separate place, I mean a separate place from pretty much everything else, if that's possible. And I realize this isn't possible for everyone, especially if you're in a small living space. But at the minimum, you want to try to carve out a separate area from where you spend most of your non-work time. Now, I have a home office where I can close the door, and I have a wired internet connection if I need it. Now, your separate area might not be an office. Maybe it's some kind of separate room. That's not your bedroom. But having said that, I will tell you that I switch up my my workspace in the summer. Although I do have a home office, I usually work at my kitchen table in the summer, and that's because we don't run the AC all the time in the summer, especially because my office is upstairs. So the upstairs can get pretty hot during the day, and we don't want to run the air conditioning. My kitchen has a ceiling fan. It's cooler, but it's still a separate workspace because at the very least it's not my bedroom. And I realize you may not have a choice. I have talked to people already who say they have, their workspace is a place, maybe a little card table even, in their bedroom. So you have to do whatever works for you and what you have space to do. Someone just mentioned they have 700 square feet. Obviously, you're not going to have a separate room. Joanne says they have the dining room table. The idea is you want to have a place that, at the very least, you can say, this is my workspace and I don't do other things in this area. And the reason is because the boundaries, and some of you already mentioned this in the chat, got to have AC, Nate says. Well, you're in Florida. Yes, you do. But boundaries really matter. The thing is, even if you're not able to be in a completely physically separated space, you're going to realize pretty fast that mental separation is going to be critical for your own mental health, because working in the same space as your bed, for instance, blurs that line even further between work and home. So a space where your main activity is work-related helps keep that boundary from blurring quite as much. And believe me, it is going to blur. Even with my home office, I still have difficulty putting aside work mentally because I'm in the same building with it all the time. It's at least a little easier to not think about work all the time when you get to leave an actual building, right? So what happens when you never leave? I can tell you it's not a pretty picture, especially if you don't have set hours that you're supposed to work in. So that's why routine is also mission critical here, because it's going to become fundamental for you if you're going to manage this successfully. You want to keep the same hours every day, whenever possible, because even if you didn't have consistent hours when you were working inside of a building, this is one of the things that really gives structure to your day, and it helps keep that ever important home/work boundary from blurring. Our director at Oakland, Don Yarman, discovered that his lack of routine was detrimental to his getting work done, because even though he had worked from home sporadically before the pandemic, he'd never had to do it day after day after day, and it's really easy to think, oh, I'll just go do some laundry, and then I'll get some library work done. Don't do that. Treat your work day as your work day. The other thing is that routine can also matter for the folks around you at home. Having consistent hours help define boundaries for them too, for your kids, your significant other, your family, whoever you're living with. It can also help define routines even for your pets. For example, I have 2 cats, and years ago, before I had a voice over IP phone from the office, I was set up on Skype to do my work phone calls. I don't know if you've ever heard Skype shut down, and maybe it doesn't make this noise anymore, but it used to. It has a very distinctive sound that it makes when it shuts down, and every day at 3:30 I would shut down Skype, and my cats would go galloping down the stairs because they knew it was dinner time. When I started using an actual voice phone, there was no shutdown sound anymore, and it has been chaos ever since because my cats don't know when dinner time is, so instead they stalk me in my office and sit on my desk and stare at me because there's no routine anymore. So it does matter for everyone who's around you, including the ones with 4 paws. Or 4 legs. This is my son. He's a freshman in high school. There are lots of jokes, and have been for years, about not getting dressed, not showering when you're telecommuting, and it can be really tempting to stay in your jammies all day, and especially if you're not going to be on camera, right? But for myself, I have to get dressed or I don't feel like I'm working. In fact, when my son first started doing online learning for school, Cheryl says I have 4-day-old hair. Someone suggested recording the Skype shutdown noise. That's not actually a bad idea. I think it's too late, though. We have years of chaos under my belt. But he discovered when he first started doing school from home that he wasn't motivated. And he came in one morning looking just like in the before picture. In fact, he let me take a picture, and he's like, I don't feel like doing my work. I'm like, well, clearly you don't look like you're ready to do any work. So he got showered, he got dressed. He obviously is feeling up to things. And Natalia says getting dressed is really helpful. It really is, and it seems like common sense, but sometimes it's hard to realize what an effect it has on you until you actually do it. And so I do have to get showered and dressed every day, even if I'm not going to be on camera. You may also have discovered that ergonomics play a huge part, not just at the library where you work, but also at home where you work. And there are 3 key rules here for ergonomics. And you see these here at the bottom. An eye-level monitor, first of all. This is really important. You don't want to be craning your head up to look at your screen, and this is a problem, by the way, with some monitor stands. You also don't want to be looking down at your screen, because that's like when you're hunched over your phone, you get the same bad effect on your neck that way. Ergonomic mouse and keyboard. I do have a gaming mouse, which is pretty ergonomic, but I will confess to you, I do not have an ergonomic keyboard or a rest for my wrist or anything like that. I type on my laptop's default keyboard. I have for years. It drives people crazy when I tell them that, because but it works for me, and that's the thing. If you can do it for hours and hours and it doesn't bother you, lucky you. A chair with back support. I saw someone in the chat say that they missed their chair from work. I saw someone say they bought a new chair. I don't actually have a chair with a back on it. I actually have a ball chair. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those, but it's like a big yoga ball that sits in a plastic frame with wheels. And so allegedly, it's supposed to work my core. I don't know if it does that, but I do know that it is virtually impossible to actually slouch in a ball chair. So at least it prevents back problems. So anything that works for you is what you should try to go with. And another thing to consider, this is some advice from my coworker Jessica, is that comfy couch that you spent 1 or 2 hours working on one time on your laptop, or maybe even just while you're chilling out watching Netflix, it may not be as comfy after 8 hours in that same position on that same couch. So be aware that what starts out comfy may not end up comfy. A lot of folks discussing what they missed at the library, including monitors in the chat. You also need to set limits for the people around you, whether that's your kids, whether that's your significant other or other family member that's living with you. Set rules about interruptions and tell them about those rules and enforce them. And by the way, this doesn't apply just to folks who are around you physically. For example, I have to let people know that they can't call me during certain hours. I'm at work. I'm not supposed to take phone calls. So for example, my in-laws, they're not very tech savvy. They're in their 80s. Email is kind of a push for them. So their first response to communication is the phone, but I can't pick up the phone during my work hours. So they've learned that I'm not going to pick up the phone during a certain time if they call, and they've mostly learned not to call me during that time. You know, they're in their 80s. They don't always remember. That's okay, but they do know that I'm not going to pick up the phone. But what if it's too quiet for you? What if, or talking to your family is too distracting? Here's some tools that might help you. This one is called Coffeetivity. This is one of my favorites. It actually gives you a coffee shop ambiance, so it gives you kind of that background noise as if you were working in Starbucks, but you can actually see on the left-hand side there are different kinds of coffee shops that you can choose if you'd like some noise that way, so it's great white noise. One I found out about just a couple weeks ago, Cheryl says, my boyfriend has been singing Christmas carols every single day. We live in a studio. Cheryl, congratulations on not committing a felony. My gosh. This one is called I Miss the Office, and so this is stereotypical office sounds, but it also has a couple neat features. You can see on the bottom right, you can choose the number of colleagues that you want around you, so if you have more colleagues, it's a little noisier. Also, you can choose specific noises to add to your mix. For example, if you are used to having the copier run by you all day, you can add the copier to your sound mix. Lots of discussions at Starbucks. So this is a fun one, but because I know we're a library crowd, I also wanted to include this one. This is a Harry Potter sounds ambient mixer, and this allows you to recreate or play recreations of all sorts of Harry Potter sounds. Don't ask me how they come up with these, I don't know, but this is just a screenshot of the Gryffindor common room option, but they have options for all of the Hogwarts common rooms. You can also listen to the Hogwarts Library, the Leaky Cauldron, Breakfast at the Burrow, Diagon Alley, Potions Class. There's a lot of these. Okay, so moving on. Let's talk about video conferencing, since I told you you have to get dressed, right? So the very first thing, lots of stories about what people are experiencing at home. Let's talk first of all about lighting and the position of your lighting. One of the very first rules when you're doing video of any kind is to not put a bright light behind you. Webcams are pretty smart, but if you have a bright light behind you, your face is going to look pretty much like a black blob. So if you have a window behind you, you're going to need to use curtains or blinds to somehow block out that light in order to get any kind of clear video. here is a URL thank you for whoever is putting the URLs into the chat, by the way. I appreciate that. Here's another URL. This is onlinemictest.com. You can actually test not only your microphone, but also your webcam. So before you get into that Adobe or Zoom meeting or whatever you're going to, you can see what you're going to sound like, what you're going to look like, without actually having to do that in front of all the other people in the meeting. Another thing to consider, though, is that aside from having like a window at your back, so my coworker Vince, unfortunately, his place is small and he has to have a window behind him. But one of the things he discovered is that his monitor was actually causing more of a problem than it might have otherwise because it had serious glare issues. I also want to talk a little bit about front lighting. Front lighting means make sure there's a light source illuminating the front of your face. Remember, I already told you, don't have a light source in back of you. You need to have it in front of you. And by the way, that light source at the front needs to be the brightest thing in the room. And that's because webcams are just smart enough to be a problem when it comes to lighting. So if, let's say, you have a window to the side of you, and you think that's fine, Laura said don't have it to the back, it's okay, it's over to the side now. And let's say you have a lamp on your desk, that is your front lighting. And then, let's say you've got the sun streaming in that side window, and it's going to be probably, because it's the sun, brighter than that lamp on your desk. So the webcam is going to focus on the brightest thing in the room. So you want to make sure that whatever your front lighting is, it's going to win the lighting war if you have more than one lighting source in your room. Here's just a quick photo of my setup here in Ohio. And you'll notice that I have two lamps on my desk. The one over to the left is dim, and it's the one I use most of the time, the pretty one. But over to the right is a daylight lamp, because here in Ohio, as I mentioned very early on, we don't have the kind of sunlight you folks do. So during the winter, it's dark and dreary, and I don't know why I live here. But I do have a daylight lamp, and it actually is very good for lighting also when I'm doing meetings in the winter especially. And notice that I'm doing this despite the fact I have a window right in front of my computer. Move to Florida. I'd love to. Not going to happen. But notice even with the window, I still have some appropriate front lighting. Oh, someone from Parma Heights, that's on the west side of Cleveland. I see that in the chat. You also want to make sure that the camera is positioned appropriately. Now, on most laptops, they come with a camera these days, and it's usually centered nicely, and as long as your monitor is at eye level, you're generally going to be looking right into the webcam, and that's what you want. But if you have a separate webcam, you want to make sure that it's not positioned off to the side. It also needs to be in the center. Oh, people are sharing other noise ambiance tools. Cool. So make sure your webcam's in the right place. But one thing that a lot of folks don't think about is how they're framed when it comes to video. This is a really good demonstration of good and bad and appropriate framing. So over on the left, you can see this woman. She's positioned herself right in the middle of the screen, which is kind of instinctual for many of us, but it doesn't actually look right. She's got too much headspace above her over on the left. And over on the right, too close, I don't care how much I like you. I don't want you that close to the webcam. That's really disconcerting. So you want to go for that nice middle ground. This is kind of like a Goldilocks demo right here. But you want to have just a little headspace up top, and you want to be framed appropriately. I'm afraid Debbie is perfect. I'm afraid to be looking at Debbie. I'll spend all my time looking at Debbie. So also, one of the things I find hardest myself, to be honest, is looking directly at the webcam. When I'm in a meeting, it's really hard for me not to look at the screen where the other people are. You have to remember that you have to stare at the webcam, and I'm constantly reminding myself, Laura, stare at the webcam, because that's actually where other people will see you, and otherwise they're going to see this increasing view of your forehead as you get closer to the screen and you kind of drop down looking at everybody else on the screen. Now, if you take nothing else out of this today, This is the one thing I want you to remember, because when you don't do this, you are driving everyone else nuts. This is your new default. When you come into a meeting, please mute your mic. The only exception to this is if you are in a meeting and there are only 2 people, yourself included. When the number surpasses 2, you have to turn off your mic. The minute you get in there, your new default is mute. Please mute your mic. You're driving us all crazy. The other thing about this, though, is that if you get in the habit of coming off mute when you want to speak, that can also act as a signal, especially when everybody else does it, that coming off mute is a sign that you want to speak. So this is an etiquette thing, but it's also very practical. And yes, dogs bark, and that's one of the reasons that it needs to be mute, is because stuff happens around you in the background you can't necessarily control, or you're just moving around your desk and you're not thinking about it. So mute your mic. Also, keep your movement to a minimum. You shouldn't be moving around a whole lot. You know, this is not the time to be cleaning your desk. You know, try to avoid getting up and down. The problem is, as human beings, we are hardwired to look for movement. So when you're moving around, it's distracting from everything else going on in the meeting. Linda says, I listened to a lady take a drink. Gross. Yeah, probably not fun. And there's all kinds of funny jokes about that too. But as far as movement goes, keep it to a minimum. But here's the exception, because you have to remember that video meetings are video for a reason. They're not phone calls, not just audio, for a reason. It's because we want to see human expression. We just don't want to see you dancing a jig while the meeting is going on. Gestures are okay. It's okay to do thumbs up, to shake your head yes or no, to use facial expressions. That's all fine. Sam says, I keep something small in my hands out of the video to fiddle with. Good idea. And that's okay too. As long as nobody can see it, go for it. Pets and kids, especially now, don't hide them. This is a tweet from a company that had a Take Your Pets to Zoom day. And I guess that also included kids, if you look carefully. But this was a really cute idea, and it really illustrates how views about this are changing really, really fast. In fact, I was at a board meeting for my agency just a couple of weeks ago, and one of my cats pushed the door open when I thought I had latched it, climbed up on the desk, and decided to make an appearance. Christina, 6-foot snake, what kind? I volunteer for a herpetology rescue. Anyway, pets and kids are going to interrupt you. It happens. The fact that now it's happening to so many people has pretty much made this a cultural and social norm. Don't panic about it. In fact, people often enjoy it. It can be a nice break, especially if you have cute kids or cute pets. So Sam's talking about his dog. But one last thing about webcams from my coworker Carl, and it's very practical, and it's one I have to remind myself of sometimes as well. On a webcam, people can see your eyes roll. And so you have to remember, it's not like the phone in that people are actually looking at you. So and I know many of us get into conversations where we want to roll our eyes, but we have to be much more careful about that kind of thing, obviously on a webcam. Okay, so just a little bit about customer service and internal communications. So I told you I work for Oakland, and you have no reason to recognize this building, but also most library folks in Ohio would not recognize this building. And the reason is because we very rarely actually have library folks see us face to face. We have been working entirely remotely as far as they're concerned, pretty much since our inception over 20 years ago. So we handle all of our customer service via either chat or email or fax or phone. And my director, Don, says if we could take carrier pigeons, we would do that too. So we will take just about anything that people can get to us as a customer service request. One of the things that we have to remember, though, especially when we're working in chat, is that sometimes it can be really easy to leave people hanging. I don't know if any of you have ever worked with like an Ask a Librarian service or anything like that, but the rule generally is when someone is asking for help, the person asking can take as long as they want to respond, but you as the person providing the help cannot. You need to work as quickly as possible. So whether it's chat or email, phone, whatever it is, you don't have that luxury. So they can take forever responding to a message you just sent in chat, but you need to, if you're going to take longer than, a minute or so, you need to let them know that it's going to take longer. One thing to remember also, let me change the slide here just a second, is you want to over-communicate with your coworkers. Sometimes we can feel isolated. Remember, I have been working from home almost entirely for 12 years, and the rest of my office is mostly in the physical office most of the time, up until, obviously, the pandemic. So it's very easy for me to feel that I'm isolated from the rest of my coworkers, but I haven't been. And part of that is because all of us have become very good at over-communicating. When everybody is isolated, that feeling of I've got to reach out is stronger, but I encourage you to listen to it. There's no harm in reaching out and saying, hello, how are you doing? Or just sending emails or, whatever. We have a Slack channel at Oakland for our own use, and we do a lot of communication in there, and we do it often. There's nothing wrong with communicating more than you normally would if you were in the building, and I encourage you to do that. One of the most important things to remember right now is this quote from George Bernard Shaw. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. That right now, with everyone so isolated, this is really important. Communicate more than you normally would. And when you're all remote, you're all kind of wondering what's going on. By the way, I'll just throw this out there. While you're communicating, just remember, whether it's in a Slack channel or any kind of written communication, whatever you're typing can be public record, so be careful. Some things are not appropriate. We joke around a lot in our Slack channel, but there's nothing in there that could potentially get anybody fired or disciplined or anything like that. So just keep that in mind. But another thing that you can do with your coworkers that really helps is to acknowledge and affirm them. Yes, Kelly, the newspaper test. My husband works for a bank, and that's how they evaluate everything. Don't write it if you are not okay with it being on the front page of the newspaper. We probably are a little more edgy than that, just because it's an internal place, but there's nothing on it that that would get anybody fired. So what I mean by acknowledge and affirm is, for example, in our Slack channel, very little ever gets posted with literally no response. Someone generally tries to respond to pretty much everything. So we make heavy use of emojis. Sometimes we use animated GIFs. And if somebody does something good, we try to acknowledge that as well in the Slack channel where everybody can see it. So it's really nice that we have this affirmative environment. And even though I have been isolated from all of them for a long time, I have never felt left out, which is really nice, and I appreciate that. Now, this is a slide I keep saying I need to print out and hang by my bed. I can't tell you how many times I have been awakened when I am taking a sick day and I'm sleeping because I forgot to snooze the chat notifications on my phone. And of course, work is still happening. I'm not there, but it's still happening and people are still chatting, and then Slack notifications start up and wake me up. So you have to remember, if you have this, for example, some kind of chat mechanism, either for the public or internally, snooze your notifications when you go to bed. Or do something on your phone where it's not going to show those after a certain hour. So that's just something to remember. The other thing, too, is if you're now just starting to use some kind of internal chat mechanism, you have to remember that chat mechanisms, whether it's Slack or any other kind of chat thing, can also be used as a non-urgent messaging system. So you should expect to get messages at off hours. So that's another reason that you should be snoozing these. I see some discussion about what folks are using. Okay, the last section here. So I want to talk about tech because IT really matters, especially when you're at home. You know, at the library or wherever you work, your school, your university, you generally have the luxury of having an IT department or an IT person who takes care of these things. But now that you're at home, you are not, that luxury isn't available to you generally. Now you are the IT department or the IT person. So one thing you may have already experienced is that your Wi-Fi might be getting a little stressed. And Gina says, my teenage son is my IT person at home. Well, at least you've got somebody. That's great, as long as you trust him. I don't let my son near my router. He spent a week at Cybersecurity camp learning how to write Trojans. I don't let him near any of my stuff. But you know, if you've got kids at home who are doing online learning, and maybe they're doing Zoom or Google Hangouts, or they're FaceTiming their friends, or heck, if they're just playing Xbox or anything else, chances are good your Wi-Fi is getting a serious workout right now. So I wanted to include just a couple links here on this slide. One about how to speed up your Wi-Fi, and another if you want to take it one step further. Thank you so much for putting the links into, oh, that's not my link. Sorry, SHR. But ways to speed up your network, and also if you want to go one level up and you want to upgrade your home Wi-Fi, these are geared for the layperson, so these are a good place to start. Obviously, I can't go into exactly how to do it for everybody, and it's going to be different for everyone anyway. And that's another thing to remember with IT at home, is that it is different for everyone. So it's not all standardized like it is at the library. Nate says, I can yell at Comcast on the phone. I can't yell at IT staff at the branch. Oh, good. Thanks for putting the links in, Gigi. Another thing to keep in mind, and where I'm going to go with the rest of this, your home Wi-Fi is generally not as well defended as an office or a library network. It doesn't have probably necessarily serious firewalls. It probably doesn't have anomaly detection monitoring. There's a whole lot of things you may not even realize are going on with your work network that you don't have at home, things that are protecting you at the library. So here's some basic things to do or keep in mind. The very first thing that I want you to do is to keep up with the updates. And I know that this can be a real pain because Windows wants updates. The browsers want updates. Programs want updates. Everything wants updates. But updates are really important because they often include patches for security vulnerabilities that have been uncovered since the last time the software has been updated. So this is a simple thing that you can do. I know it's not fun. Nobody likes to do updates, but you need to keep up with these. So make sure that your work computer or device, whatever it is you're using to do your work on, is running all the latest updates. And whenever possible, by the way, let things do automatic updates. That will save you a lot of trouble because they can be done at times possibly when you don't need them, for one, and also you don't have to manually start them. There are 3 other things that I'd like you to do. The first one is I want you to change the default administrator password on your Wi-Fi router. A lot of folks don't do this, and they just leave whatever the default password is for the administrator account. And the problem with that, of course, is that hackers can easily find that password because it was provided by the manufacturer, and so it's out there. It's really easy to get. So this is an important thing to change. And SHR says, I've noticed that when my computer freezes, it's looking for an update. Huh. Yeah, some computers get a little, or devices can get a little cranky if they don't get their updates. It's like their coffee fix. They've got to have it. You also want to enable strong security. So what that means is that nobody driving around your neighborhood should be able to be scanning for Wi-Fi networks and find out that yours does not require a password. Your Wi-Fi needs a password. I don't see this problem as often as I used to. Most home networks I see these days generally at least have this taken care of, but if you don't, this is the time to do that. And lastly, make your passwords for your network strong. And also, not just strong, don't make it the same as the administrative account on the router. Don't use the same password in the two different places. But for example, here at home, I'm actually not the IT person. My husband is the hardware geek. I'm more of the software geek. But he takes care of the network, and the password for our network is insane. I hate it with a passion. It's terrible because it's so annoyingly long and complex. So when I go to put it into a new device, like a smart TV or something, and you have to page through individual letters and symbols, it takes forever. But the good thing about putting passwords like this into any device is that devices generally are stored. So once you've done it twice, the password is stored. You don't have to do it again. And Sam says, my sister once made her Wi-Fi password, I've already told you 5 times. That's actually good. That's a passphrase, and that's actually fairly strong. So that's not a bad one at all. That's hilarious. So again, everybody's equipment is different. And again, I also am not the hardware geek, so I certainly wouldn't be the best person to explain certain things to you. But this is a really nice place to start. Again, geared for the layperson, where you can get more information about securing your router and your Wi-Fi network. Nate says, my Wi-Fi password is the entire text of The Great Gatsby. Wow, okay. Now, one of the reasons that all this is important, especially right now, I mean, security is always important on a network, granted, but right now it might actually be way more important than you realize. John Graham Cumming is the Chief Technology Officer for a company. It's an internet infrastructure company called Cloudflare. You might have heard of it. It's pretty big. And right now, he and other infrastructure providers actually are not worried about the load. You know, we're all getting up and using our Wi-Fi and our internet tons every day, more so in our homes than we probably ever have before, and more people using it at one time. The providers are not worried about the load right now. They're managing just fine. What's keeping Graham Cumming and all these other folks up at night is the fact that now there are a lot of hackers and script kiddies with a lot of spare time on their hands. And what's been happening is that since the start of the pandemic, companies have seen attacks like DDoS attacks or distributed denial of service attacks go up by 50 to 70% over January, which is massive. That's what's keeping them up, is the fact that they're spending a lot more time and effort managing hackers and people trying to attack networks than they ever have. And so this is a real problem, and why you need to be aware, because remember again, home networks don't have the same kinds of protections that you probably had at your library. And by the way, one of the things that's also taken off tremendously are phishing emails. With the coronavirus in particular, lots of scammers are trying to get more people caught with this. And so one of the things I would like you to do is to be extra suspicious, especially as a remote worker, of anything that's asking you to check or renew your passwords or your login credentials, even if they seem to come from a trusted source. If you're not absolutely sure, there is no harm, no foul in asking whoever allegedly sent it to you and saying, did you actually send this, before you click on anything. There's nothing wrong with that, especially right now. So make sure that you do that. Verify the authenticity. Now, a few tells that you can look for. So spelling and grammar errors have always been a common clue that something's a phishing email, unless you know that person doesn't spell anyway, doesn't spell well. But other than that, one of the things that you can do, if there's a link in this email, hover over the link. In the browser at the bottom, just about all browsers do this, it will show you where that link actually goes. And if the URL doesn't look like where you thought it would go, probably a good clue not to touch it. And again, contact the sender if you are not 100% sure. There's nothing wrong with that at all. If you do click, though, and you get someplace a few things you can check for. First, you might have noticed over the past year or two, pretty much everything has moved to HTTPS from HTTP, and the S pretty much stands for secure. But the thing is, that used to be a much more consistent clue than it is now. Some phishing sites have gotten much more sophisticated, and now they have gone out and bought secure socket layer certificates, or SSL certificates, which means that their sites now use HTTPS. So that's usually a good indicator if you don't see the HTTPS and you only see HTTP, but it's not a guarantee. Spelling and grammar errors in the site or on the page, again. Another big tell, though, missing contact information. If you don't see any way to contact this organization or anybody, no phone, no address, nothing, also no about us information, that's usually a dead giveaway that you're on a phishing site of some kind. Another thing to consider tech-wise is having a backup plan. Now, if you're on some kind of library-provided device, chances are good that you probably have been told how to do this, or maybe the library has some kind of cloud storage that you use. But you need to have some kind of plan. Now, obviously, you're probably not going to use a floppy disk or a notebook like here on this slide. But whether it's a flash drive or you're burning it to a CD or a DVD or something, or putting it up to the cloud, you need to ask your IT folks what you should be doing when you're backing up your library-specific work. One of the things about this, though, that you need to be really careful about is that you cannot mix up your personal stuff with your work stuff, whether it's personal email or personal cloud storage. Don't mix that up at all, because remember, it can be subject to public records law, and you don't want your personal email or your personal Google Drive or other cloud storage to be involved in that. So if you have been mixing those up, you need to stop that right now, separate them out, and delete anything that was library related out of your personal stuff. One last thing I'll share with you is a really handy it's not a hack, but a lot of folks aren't aware that you can do this. So most major OSs, operating systems, have some variation of this, but you can separate out your work stuff from your home stuff if you are working for both on the same machine or device. So the names are different, and if you look at this URL from Gizmodo, it actually will tell you how to start putting one together for, let me think, Windows, Chrome OS, and Mac. I think it at least covers those three. But the nice thing is that you can give each work project a separate space, or of course split out your personal and your professional stuff, like I said, into separate desktops. But the menu bar, the dock, the start menu, desktop shortcuts, and a few other things stay consistent across all the desktops, but you can separate out just about everything else. So this is a great way to at least keep things visually separated for yourself, and that may be really handy for you. And Kathleen says, we have access to the shared drive at work in Lee County. Hopefully you do remotely as well. Office 365 and OneDrive, says SHR. So yeah, good. So a few of you already have library-provided backup solutions, but you want to make sure that there is something. So the big takeaways for today. First, remember to treat work like work. You can only do so much with your environment. You didn't have time to plan, so no one's going to fault you if your work environment is not ideal. Do what works for you, but at the very least, keep those boundaries between work and your home life. Keep them up as strong as possible. Also, think about looking and doing better in video conferences, and remember, if nothing else today, mute your mic. Mute your mic. I feel like I should be shouting that from the rooftops. Not to you folks necessarily, but I've now been in so many meetings over the past 2 weeks where I just want to shout that at people. Stay in touch with your coworkers, and don't forget to over-communicate. You can't actually over-communicate at this point. It's very unlikely that anyone's going to get annoyed at you unless you're literally sending hundreds of emails an hour. You're welcome, Heather. She appreciates that I emphasize muting. Like I said, I feel like I need to shout it from the rooftops these days. And lastly, security really matters. And you may be your IT person now, or maybe your family member. Some of you are lucky enough to have a family member who is your IT person. But these IT concerns do need to be taken care of while you're working from home. And the very last thing I'll share with you today, this is my cat Georgie. He is a 16-pound Siberian, and this is where he tends to try to spend his mornings. He takes up the vast majority of my mouse pad. I shove him off. He gets angry. He comes again the next morning and does the same thing. Yes, he is a big fluff ball, although there's a lot of muscle under all that fluff. Thank you. Yes, I'm sorry you can't see his face. He's too busy sleeping. But if you want to get a hold of me, my email and my Twitter account are up at the top. And I want to thank all of you for coming today. And thank you so much for chatting while I was talking. I actually really like that. And SHR asked, will I be able to get a copy of the slides? I can send a printout of the slides to Cindy at the organization, if that would be helpful, if she would like to distribute that. Good luck, folks. Remember, you're not actually alone. Oh, thank you, Christina. And thank you to Debbie. This is my first time working with a sign language interpreter, and it's very difficult not to watch her